tonight's weather.
And now,
the next storm
marine
here,
weather
tracking,
around Alaska.
Northeastward, or actually northeastward here, and a good fetch of moisture coming northeastward here in the good southwest flow, bringing snow and wind back into the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island. Snow and blowing snow, winter weather warnings out for many areas here later tonight and into tomorrow. Blizzard warning ends late tonight for the central Arctic coast. Areas of snow continue here over the central and eastern interior, down into the Copper River Basin, and stays snowy over the southeast coast, especially in the north. And that continues through Monday. Still low pressure off the panhandle, off the coast of the panhandle there coming up. And so central and northern areas continue some snow, and maybe Yakutat changing back to snow, but it'll be light, whatever falls. Mostly sunny here over southern Alaska under high pressure as this system pushes off to the northeast and then starts to take a more easterly track and weakens, but a good trough swinging through the central and eastern interior and northeast part of the state with a low center tracking toward the Mackenzie River Delta. So a good shot of snow with that coming into those areas as it dries out under a big area high pressure developing along the Yukon Delta coast. So light winds, dry conditions, a lot of clearing here for the Aleutians, Bering Sea, southern Alaska in the west. Next system way out there to the west being held back by this big high. Coastal water forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. South to southeast 15 to 20 for the central coast, and the north coast, north to northwest 10 to 15 knots. Clarence Strait southeast at 20 and south winds 25 knots for Stevens Passage, and Lynn Canal there southeast 20 knots with gusts to 35 knots. And for Tuesday, north winds at 25 for the northern and central inside waters, north at 20 for Clarence Strait, and the central and south coast here looking at northeast winds at 20 knots, and the north coast north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Prince William Sound, north winds at 20 knots tomorrow, and the North Gulf Coast, north winds 20 to 25. Small craft advisories, Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay for northeast winds at 25 knots, and Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. And for Tuesday, still light winds, northern Cook Inlet out of the northeast, but small craft advisories there for southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, north at 25. Northwest 30 knots there for the Barren Islands. Prince William Sound, light northwest wind at 10 knots. And western North Gulf Coast, northwest at 15 knots. Eastern North Gulf Coast, north winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, northeast winds 20 knots for Monday. The Alaska Peninsula here, variable to just variable winds, 10 to 20 knots. And forgot Bristol Bay, light east winds at 10. And for Tuesday for Bristol Bay, those winds increase to 25 knots from the northeast. And small craft advisories now for the Alaska Peninsula, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, and north to northeasterlies at 15 to 20 for Kodiak Island. Eastern Aleutians, south winds 15 to 30 knots for the day tomorrow, seas as high as 10 to 13 feet. Adak and Atka, gale warning, south winds 35 knots, southwest 40 knots for Amchitka Island, and then the western Aleutians west 20 to 25. And for Tuesday, western Aleutians as the next front way out there in the Komodorski starts to kick the winds up, particularly for Shimei and Attu to 35 knots in the afternoon. Otherwise, east to 25 for the east central Aleutians, or for the west central Aleutians. Adak and Atka, northeast winds at 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, northeast winds, 30 to 40 knots. For the southwest coast tomorrow, south winds, 30 to 40 knots with 40-knot winds for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, all from the south. Southwest 45 knots for St. Matthew Island and 35-knot south winds for the Pribilofs. And for the day on Tuesday, east winds at 30 knots for St. Paul and St. George, southeast 25 for St. Matthew Island, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots for the southwest coast, and northwest at 20 knots for St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds down now to 20 to 25 knots, still from the east, 30 knots for the central Arctic coast, and then gale warnings for the western Arctic coast, east winds 35 knots, and the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds 40 to 45 knots. And then for Tuesday, Gale warnings here for the central and western Arctic coast. Southwest 40 knots for the Chukchi Sea. Southwest winds 20 to 30 knots. Brisk wind advisories for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for those west to southwest winds at 30 knots.